Hey, friends, welcome back to the Spotlight. This is our show where we talk to folks in the creative space that make all the great stuff that we love. And we are joined this evening by one of what I consider to be the unsung heroes of modern Star Trek. This is Mr. Aaron Waltke. Aaron, good evening or good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, live long and prosper. Nice to meet you both.
Live long and prosper, which we are definitely holding out hopes for the great program that you worked on, which is Star Trek Prodigy, which fortunately I own. But otherwise, if you don't own it, it's a little hard to get your hands on. So we'll start our messaging out early that says if you don't own it, go out and buy it, and it's always better to buy it on disc, which is not how I have it. Peter, that's how you've got it, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Very smart. Well, let's get off to the races. I always begin with a very easy question. Who are you and what are you doing here? No, I'm just kidding. How did you get started in the entertainment business? Tell us all about it.
How did I get started? Well, it was sort of like a slow roll of inevitability, I guess, insofar as I grew up in central Indiana, which is about as far away from the entertainment industry or any film or television as you can get.
Right.
My childhood home was literally between two cornfields, to give you an idea. So the only real access I had to the world of entertainment was either watching stuff on syndication on TV or keeping our local Blockbuster, RIP, forever rented out of all of their science fiction and fantasy films.
Right.
So that was basically me and my friends. We would hang out and eventually got a hold of my parents' camcorder and started making movies together because we just felt this inner demon to do that for some reason.
Yeah, yeah.
And eventually got quite good at it, at least good enough to understand the fundamentals, and definitely caught like the sort of writing and directing and acting bug. And It got to the point where I built up a little bit of a reel of sort of weird short films I made with my friends, sort of Edgar Wright style, I suppose. And When I went to college, I got involved in theater and sketch comedy and screenwriting and whatnot, live performance, and also worked at PBS there, making
Wow.
uh, documentaries for the tri-state area. So
Nice.
it was quite an eclectic but informative experience of just sort of many points of light coming together and all that. Um, but along the way, especially uh, anything that was genre based, westerns, horror, sci-fi, fantasy was definitely my jam. Star Trek was very formative for me. Like I people say, what was your first encounter with Star Trek? And I'm like, I don't have one that of memory. Like it was it was just always kind of there.
Yeah.
The
Same.
closest answer I could give to that is like one of my earliest memories was sitting on the couch with my dad, and I remember watching our little 480 television and seeing the saucer separation and the Jerry Goldsmith
Ooh.
the fanfare playing. And I
Encounter at
realized
Farpoint.
years later it was Encounter at Farpoint, watching it live way back in September of 1987 with my
Ugh.
dad. And like, obviously I had no idea what was going on, but I was like entranced because,
Right. Right.
it was so crazy to me.
I
Um,
know.
that was definitely a bonding thing. We would watch that program together. And then my dad was a huge TOS fan growing up. So when I was old enough, he would take me to the movies, and that's all the Star Trek movies as they came out. And when I was at my aunt's house, I would watch the original series because I think our local PBS station inexplicably aired it.
That is weird. Yeah.
And maybe in thinking it was educational, my aunt put it on for me. And meanwhile,
Could be.
I was, so I got, and it was, I was sort of like a child out of time insofar as like a lot of the TV that I watched was retro. Like I watched a lot of Nick at Night. So I watched I Love Lucy and Dick Van Dyke and Mary
Yeah.
Tyler Moore,
Right.
and Star Trek, and I guess a little bit of other stuff like Doctor Who, and certainly a lot of Mighty Python and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I was like
Ooh.
nothing that was. I mean,
All the
I certainly
classics.
watched some of the stuff that was on the air at the same time, but that was the
Yeah.
stuff that I really absorbed
Yeah.
because my parents would throw it on. And so I moved to LA after college with my reel, and my first job was working at a production company called National Lampoon. which
Oh yes.
most famous for like the movie Animal House, or the
Oh
Chevy Chase
yes.
vacation movies, or Van Wilder with Ryan Reynolds.
Mhm.
Um, and they had just started making content for this newfangled thing called YouTube. um,
What?
Everyone was trying to figure out how to make money off of it, and so they were hiring this little web team to basically create content for that, and also for what was called the National Lampoon College Network, which aired on like 200 college campuses across the United States. And so that was my first job, was basically minimum wage making comedy. for,
Yeah. In the
um,
trenches.
in the trenches. And it was cool because, like, everybody wanted to be involved with the internet. And so like we got some pretty decent celebrities to come in and do silly sketches with us. And then like 8 months later, College Humor came along and said, hey,
Oh,
they're doing, we're just going to do it better.
I still love watching those
Yeah.
because they're still out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dropout's amazing. So anyhow, that was how I kind of broke in. And then eventually, I'm paraphrasing a lot, but eventually some of my friends sold a show to a YouTube channel. So I made some I wrote some animated shorts for them, sold my own animated pilot to them. And then eventually one of my scripts found its way over to DreamWorks, where I was hired on a show called Trollhunters from Guillermo
Oh
del
yes.
Toro. And the head writers on that were the Hageman brothers,
Oh yeah.
who I've now known for over a decade, which is crazy to say. And became friends and collaborators with them. Also in that room was Ashley A.C. Bradley, who went on to create Marvel's What If, and Mark Guggenheim, who helped create the Arrowverse.
I know Mark.
Yeah,
We've had him on the show. Yeah.
yeah, Mark's great. And Rodrigo Blas, who came over from Pixar, all these really like titans of their craft, and we all just kind of. It was a very small collaborative thing, and Netflix came along and said, "Oh, Guillermo del Toro is involved. Okay, here's 52 episodes, sight unseen. Make some show." And so we were just
Yep.
kind of locked in a room to go insane for 2 years.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
That was great.
and not only did I get to learn a ton from those people, but I also got to show them like what I could do, and it
Yeah.
gave me the confidence to kind of ascend and make a career in film and television. So that was kind of my start, and after that, I've just been hopping from project to project ever since, including
Right.
Star Trek Prodigy.
Yes. 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 Awesome. Well, I think Peter wants to talk more about that. Believe it or
Yes,
not.
Big surprise. So clearly we love Star Trek on this show.
sure.
So you mentioned a little bit about how you got started with Star Trek. Like me, there's kind of that. It was just in the miasma of early
Yes.
childhood. Like,
Hmm.
when did it start? Who knows?
Yeah.
So always being a fan kind of fed into some of that creativity. Um, so how did that lead into getting involved in Prodigy? Because like, at least for me, I can see that love for old Star Trek bleeding through into the show, which I
Yeah.
find really cool. But how did all of that kind of lead into working on Prodigy?
Yeah, I mean, the Hageman sometimes would joke that I was employee number one on Prodigy because at the time that they were developing it, we were working over at sorry, we were both working at DreamWorks Animation. I was co-show running and executive producing the final installment of the Tales of Arcadia trilogy from
Yep.
Guillermo del Toro, and the Hagemans had an office there. They were writing the movie that was going to follow up and sort of be the capstone on the whole series. So our offices were basically next door, and they would occasionally pop in and say hi, and I go bother them or whatever. And I remember at one point they kind of like popped in and said like, "Hey, you like Star Trek, right, Aaron?"
Oh, maybe.
It's like just a little bit, yeah. um, and they basically said like, "Hey, we just had this meeting at Secret Hideout. They're looking to do a Star Trek show with the Trollhunters guys. Obviously, you're one of like 4 people that can do that. I can say they did that. And so, what do you think? Would you want to work on this?" And I was like, "Yeah." um, and so that,
Okay.
once they kind of gave me the basic premise of kids find a starship and use it to escape their inopportune fortunes and seek salvation among the stars. And I thought that was a really brilliant inversion of the usual trope
Mhm.
of like seeking out new life and new civilizations, and instead starting with those and then setting a course towards Starfleet. I thought that was a really interesting
Yeah.
thing that we saw glimpses of it in like Deep Space Nine, for instance, where so much of that cast was other outside alien races looking in
Right.
and
Mhm.
commenting on how weird humanity is.
Yeah.
But we never started from a place of them discovering the Federation from the first time, really. Like maybe occasional episodes, but never a whole series. And
Yeah.
building it up brick by brick of what makes Starfleet and the greater universe of Star Trek so unique and wonderful and important. And so I kind of gave them a few suggestions here or there that I knew would help answer some questions in advance. Like, if they find the starship, how do they know how to fly it? Who would be sort of telling them about this stuff? And I said, well, why don't you make one of the characters a hologram? and and eventually that sort of came out like maybe that hologram could be based on a historical figure, because as we know from episodes like Dr. Bashir, I presume, in Deep Space Nine, and obviously the Doctor himself is based on Dr. Zimmerman, and
Hmm. Hmm.
they're based on actual biographical figures that somewhat meet those sort of memory engrams of what might be relevant to whatever the hologram is for. So I was like, this is a great opportunity to bring in a familiar face if we can find the right one for that. And very quickly afterwards, we kind of narrowed down the list, and we landed on like, well, why couldn't it be Janeway? They're stuck in the Delta Quadrant, forced to whip a misfit crew together of Maquis and fledgling Starfleet officers to find a way home. I'm like, that who better to be
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
a emergency training program to do that very thing in our show. So that was kind of like my start. And yeah, it was a very quick development. They wrote the pilot, and then I think they'd written like maybe one draft of it when there was so much urgency to get started that they opened up the writers' room, and then that was it. It was great.
Off to the races.
Nice.
I love it. All right, I got a question, and it was I asked the same question of Rod Roddenberry, who was on our show a long time ago, and I actually got a chance to spend some time with him on the Star Trek cruise last week. Such a great guy. But I asked him this question, and I want to get somebody else's take. I'll probably keep asking this question as time goes by. So, being a producer or an executive producer, showrunner, kind of a melange of those things, I've always found it kind of fascinating because I'm like, what does it really mean? Like, what is the kind of day to day? But something else is you push it to a different space when it's an animated series, because you don't have actors running around. You're directing this clip of audio, or maybe you've got some people in the studio, listening to Tawny and Eugene talk on the crew about Lower Decks, because it was COVID, they were recording at home, and Noelle tells this great story about how she got locked in the closet doing a recording because she couldn't, because it was the only space that she had to do it.
Yeah.
So I just feel like the job could mean like a lot of different things. Like it's not all things to all people. But tell me, like drilling down like to the animated show piece of it, talk to me about kind of what that looked like for you. Like what was a week? What was a day? Like just tell me about the experience.
Yeah, I mean, like responsibilities kind of fall into buckets, and those buckets overlap certainly. But they
Hmm.
have, not to get too in the weeds, but there's a thing called the waterfall schedule where you start one episode, and then that gets along to a certain point, and then you have to start the next episode, and then
Oh, okay.
you're finishing up this
Mhm.
episode while the other episode is starting up and ramp, and then you do that again and again and again. It kind of looks like a waterfall.
Right. Yeah.
So eventually, everything I'm going to describe are all happening at the same time in different points for 20
Right.
episodes. But typically we start with early development, which is like writing the script, figuring out character arcs and story arcs for the season, and for the characters individually, like where their beginning, middle, and end is for the season, and the brainstorming important plot points or interesting relationships we think we'd like to explore, and the turning points that we would need to make those happen, but also just fun, out of the box, pie in the sky ideas of that fulfill the promise of the premise of what do we want to see in a Star Trek show that's aimed at young people.
Yeah.
Right.
And with Prodigy in particular, there was another bucket of questions of like, how do we break down what makes Star Trek unique and interesting, and makes it different from other Star series, and how do we lay that out in a format that doesn't feel just purely didactic, but actually we get to experience it in real time. And that was really helpful with the makeup of the room too, where some people were super fans like me, some people just had their favorite series, some people just had a couple of episodes they liked. But the so really like that's was always kind of going on at a certain point, just because even if after you figure all that out, then as you're writing the episodes, things might adjust and shift, and you have to go, oh, that um, character turn actually feels better here than 2 episodes later. Let's see if we can make that work, and then readjust. Then we obviously write the scripts, get notes, rewrite them, write them again. Then they go into storyboards where we pass it off to a director and a team of storyboard artists who then draw it to the best of their ability. Then it's cut into what's called an animatic, which is basically sort of a series of crude drawings that approximate what's going on. And so you can kind of, if you kind of squint, it almost looks like an animated program. And then once that's locked down and the timing feels right and all of the story seems to play, because you never know, sometimes something works on paper and then when it's actually boarded it doesn't, it's
Got
not
it.
happening, or you'll realize, oh, we over explained that, we only just need one line and the rest of it just feels obvious because your mind is with the story, right? So there's always a little bit of push and pull there. And then once you take that animatic and it's locked, then we ship it off to do a number of animated steps that I don't have to lay out here, but there's a thing called layout. There's animation first pass, second pass. There's compositing, lighting, music.
Right.
All these different steps. Each one makes it a little bit better, a little bit tighter, a little bit cleaner, a little bit more like we actually are making a show and not a disaster. And
Unless it's a show about a disaster, in
that's
which case
true,
you're ahead of the game.
but then sure enough, there's like this magical step. Like once you get to the very last bit where you lay in the music and you're putting in the last sound effects and you mix it and you watch it top to bottom and you're like, oh my God, we've made a television episode. And that it's truly amazing. And it always feels like a magic trick to me, like that when you put in those last final steps, because your brain is like, something's missing until it's not missing anymore.
Yeah. I love it.
So yeah, that's kind of the day to day. Interspersed with that is just like a lot of meetings of from all the different departments, making sure that is this design right? What do you mean by this description? You know, what references should we use here? We can't use that, as too expensive. Is there an alternative that we can refashion it? And it's a little bit like spinning plates, but with one or too few people to spin them all. So you're running around trying to spin them. But you know, that there's method to the madness, to quote.
I love it. Gotcha.
Great
It all works. Cool. Peter.
Okay. So you already mentioned that you worked on Tales of Arcadia, the whole bit, which I thoroughly enjoyed, by the way. So how is it working on that, especially since like Tales of Arcadia mixes genres in a sense? So for those who haven't seen it, like we have Trollhunters, then we have like Three Below, which is kind of sci-fi. We have Wizards, which is obviously magic, and then everything gets tied together. So how is that different from, like, because you're working on building a whole world that ties all of these disparate things together, as opposed to like working with like an established universe like Star Trek, which has like, these are things that we do and these are things that we don't. So.
Yeah, well, I think with any world building in general, you should, at least, even if you're making up some rules as you go, I would make the argument that Star Trek also does that. But the point is, you have to have it feel consistent, and it doesn't mean that everything has to conform directly to logic or physics, because Star Trek certainly doesn't do that all the time. Sometimes they'll just say it's subspace, and you have to assume. But it has to have an internal logic to it.
You're right.
And whether you're inventing your own world from scratch or you're playing in a sandbox that's as elaborate and well defined as a Star Trek or a Doctor Who or Transformers or whatever, the key is to understand it well enough that if you are going to push into, you know, virgin territory and unknown territory, do you have does it pass the smell test, right?
Yep.
You know, because like you have to, if you're going to do something new, you have to learn how to speak the language. It's a little bit like being a
Mhm.
lawyer, right? You can
Yep.
justify just about anything, but you need to know how to cite your sources, so to speak.
Yep.
And if you are going to turn something on its head or reinvent something or change a rule, sometimes you can find really cool stories there. I mean,
Mhm.
Asimov was famous for that. Like he wrote
Right.
entire a significant portion of his oeuvre is him just thinking of stuff like the three laws of robotics and where those rules can be bent, or if you lessen one, or if you challenge one, or put them against each other, which will win out. Like that's where I think the rubber meets the road when it comes to a lot of these sort of like magic systems or Star Trek systems, to the
Mhm.
point where if you are fluent enough in the language, you can know when you hear chronotons or tachyons, what does that mean?
We're time traveling.
Time traveling. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, but it's saying that to somebody randomly, they'd be like, "What the hell are you talking
That's
about?"
a Star Trek word. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
but the point is like you just have to both respect the canon, respect what the materials you're working with enough to understand the spirit of what people gets people excited, and be able to speak it well enough that you can reassure them that you know what you're talking about as you kind of gently guide them out of the familiar and the well trodden into those bold new strange new worlds and civilizations. It's
Mhm.
Right.
I think
Right.
that's the balance that various franchises achieve to various effects. I'll put it that
You're
way.
right.
um
Yeah.
because I think there's always on the flip side of it, there is sometimes a desire to cling so tightly to the thing that you like already that it
Mhm.
doesn't leave any room for it to exist as anything else. And I think while I think protecting what you loved about that thing is important, um, at the same time, like I don't need to see Luke Skywalker brushing his teeth. you know,
Yeah.
You've
like
just described
if that's all
everything
that's
Star
left,
Wars is working on.
if that's all that's left to do, then
Right.
what are we even doing here? I don't
Right.
think even George Lucas wanted to only focus on that. I think he created this massive world and sometimes would just allude to something like Mon
Right.
Calamari or something, and
Right.
then that would set fans' mind imaginations ablaze, and they would
Right.
Mhm.
invent this whole world. And we wrote novels and video games, and and that's the best part of world building, I think, is
Right.
putting just enough out there that it excites people to invent and create beyond
Right.
what's on the page. And that if you can do
Absolutely.
that, if you can inspire that little spark of imagination, then I think you've done your job correctly.
Speaking of world building, I want to hear all about, because this was a favorite of my kids growing up. I want to hear about Unikitty from the Lego Movie world. Like, talk to me about. I wasn't even aware of it, which is a shame because my
Sure.
kids grew up and they grew out of it. So it's not like I haven't watched that movie in a lot of years, obviously. But like, what happened in that show? What was going on? Like, and how did it end? And like, what's the future of the Lego movie verse? I know they made another one, but
Yeah.
I don't even know if I remember what happened in it.
Well, Lego has always been amazing with how they've managed to take what is effectively just a brand of building blocks, and they've turned it into like an aesthetic for stories.
Yep.
Right.
And they're doing some really amazing stuff. Like recently, they did this really fun series called, I think, Star Wars Rebuild the Universe, where that
We
Yep.
covered that. We have a Star Wars show. We covered that. So
yeah.
yeah, we enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, and I think that again, talking about sandboxes and reinvention, that's the great thing about Lego is like because it's built on this sense of play. There's a little bit of a get out of jail free card that
Mhm.
allows you to be able to be imaginative in ways that you might be a little frightened to make Jar Jar Binks Darth Maul or whatever. um, so that's what I love about Lego, and when our friends Lin Wang and Ed Scudder, who we had done a short with, they managed to sell this series based that was a spinoff of the Alison Brie character Unikitty, which is the cute little rainbow cat
Oh
that
yes.
loses her mind and gets crazy in the
Yeah.
end
Yep.
of the they 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 asked if myself and my writing partner at the time, Chad Quant, wanted to come be head writers on it. We was like, yes, of course. Long admirers of Lord and Miller and everything that they do. And it was a lot of fun. It was hard, but it was really fun being able to play in that world and work with our friends on that. And I'll always be grateful for the opportunity, for sure. It's a very strange, wacky universe.
Oh,
So, like, talk about trying to find the rules for that. That was a bit of a challenge. Trying to find the rules that you can then break, and but then that's
yep.
the beauty of Legos. You can always put it back together.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly. Then you can have Darth Jar Jar. Absolutely.
Yes.
Peter.
All right. So obviously this question is always coming up, but if you were able to continue the story of Prodigy with the Protostar crew, what do you think they'd be getting up to? I know we got a little bit of a hint at the end of the last episode,
Little slice.
but where do you
Yeah.
think they would be?
Well, I don't want to give too much away, because I do hold out hope that at certain
Yeah.
point, the dust is settled with all the mergers and all that, maybe
Right.
we could revisit
Yeah.
these characters or these stories
Which
in
would be
some way
great.
or
Yeah.
another. But I'll say this: like, obviously the end is sort of post Picard flashback, and so there's a
Mhm.
lot of like wide open vistas in terms of Star Trek canon. Like, we saw like maybe a glimpse of like 2387, that was sort
Yep.
of out of context, so we don't even know how they got that, of like at the beginning of the Kelvinverse movies with
Right.
Spock stealing the red matter and
Right.
and the
Yep.
Romulan
Jellyfish.
supernova. So we know that's
Yeah.
coming. But that also means there's effectively about 15-ish years. And if you think of like a 5-year mission, that's 3 TV shows worth
Yeah,
of
pretty
wide
much.
open vistas of anything that can happen. But I will say this, like, of all the Star Trek franchises that we covered in Prodigy, there was one that we wanted to get to once we had sort of covered TNG and Voyager, and I think that's where we were going to head next. And like, this is an interesting time in the Federation, where they've kind of like pulled back a little bit because of the insular lack of manpower and concerns about the Romulan supernova and the destruction of Utopia Planitia. So our heroes are kind of out on their own, and the question is, like, if there is a pulling back and there is a bit of a power void, as it were, a power vacuum, who will rise to fill it? That's the question.
Right. Right. And
Mhm.
they did great. I think they did great stuff with that in Discovery, when they jumped the show forward and they had, the Emerald Chain and all the big factions and stuff. So
Yeah.
I enjoy that kind of storytelling, kind of darting in and out of that, like, kind of great potential. Well, holy cow, this has been, and we're at about time, but this has been absolutely incredible. What are you working on right now? How do people engage with you? When do they see your next thing?
Yeah. So right now, I'm very excited to be working on. It's an amazing sort of epic YA fantasy series called Wings of Fire. If
Ooh.
you have I always say, if you have any teenagers in your life in the last 10 years, they've almost certainly heard of it, if not read all the books.
Mhm.
It definitely feels like in that sort of Harry Potter to Hunger Games space, where like it's that generation's Harry Potter almost. It's really cool. The easiest way I could describe it is, it's like Lord of the Rings if the dragons won.
Oh boy.
Oh Lord.
And so I'm working on that for Amazon Prime Video. We're hard at work on it right now. There's not a lot I can say about it, other than buckle up. It's going to be really awesome. And
Ooh.
as soon as I can share anything more, I certainly will. And you can follow me on social media.
Okay.
Pretty much
I know
everywhere.
I found you on Threads. That's
Yes.
how you and I chatted. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm everywhere on pretty much all the social medias, at Good Aaron,
Okay.
GOOTAARON, because my
I
last
got it.
name is really hard to spell sometimes. So yeah, Good Aaron. And if you want to follow me there, anytime there's an update, I always try to keep people abreast of it. And then also, if you ever have any questions, I'm way too terminally online, so if I can answer
Or
something, I probably will.
as many of us are. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, you can pop on over to our Patreon at Secret Friends Unite, or patreon.com/Secret Friends Unite, where there's a ton more of these interviews and a lot of great extra content, including our conversation with Aaron Waltke. Aaron, thank you so much.
Hey, my pleasure.
All
Peace and
right.
long life.
Peace. Nanu nanu. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast services around the galaxy, as well as video on our YouTube channel. You can support Secret Friends Unite by becoming a Patreon member, get bonus programs and more over at patreon.com/secretfriendsunite. Join our Discord community for even more discussions on all things geek. For all the latest updates on Secret Friends Unite, make sure to follow us on Threads at secret.friends.unite and visit secretfriendsunite.com. Find our merchandise at TeePublic and Redbubble. Thanks for listening, and may the Force live long and prosper.